to wisdom, and that is the most important part of it. My friends, till today, you must have seen so many courtroom dramas. एखाद्या चित्रपटामध्ये आपण कोर्टरूमचा एखादा ड्रामा पाहतो. वकील काहीतरी प्रश्न विचारत असतात, उलट तपास घेतात, त्यांच्याकडनं काहीतरी साक्षीदारांकडनं माहिती काढतात, आरोपी सुटतो किंवा आरोपीला शिक्षा होते. This is a courtroom drama which you normally see. Or then you had an opportunity to attend the moot courts. The moot courts is again the imagination of somebody who teaches you, who tells you what somebody is going to speak. So basically, again, it's kind of a drama. So therefore, from this virtual world of the courtroom dramas which you see in the movies, in the pictures, in the theaters, in the moot courts, you are going to step in the real courtroom now on. And therefore, what is going to happen in that real courtroom is the key question. ज्यावेळी तुम्ही हे सगळं चित्रपटातला एखादा न्यायालयाचा सीन बघता, कोर्ट मधला एखादा सीन बघता, मूड कोर्ट मध्ये तुम्ही केलेले प्रयोग असतील, या सगळ्या व्हर्च्युअल गोष्टीमधनं ज्यावेळी त्यामुळे तुम्ही खरोखरच एका न्यायालयात जाणार आहात आणि खरोखरच एका आपल्या अशिलाची बाजू मांडणार आहात, त्यावेळी तुम्हाला भेडसावणारे प्रश्न, तुमच्या समोर उभे राहणारे प्रश्न, याबद्दल थोडी माहिती देण्याकरता मी आपल्या समोर आहे. I remember my days for the first time when I started practicing, the first session which I got, I mean, I directly started practicing in the session court. Luckily, I got a session for the offense under section 376. And when I stood up before the honorable court to address the court, I still remember that my legs were shaking and I just forgot. I was totally blank as to what I am supposed to argue, what I am supposed to cross-examine. I was blank for some time. But after some time, I regained everything and slowly started. And that's the first time I actually appeared in the court. And that first feeling which you get when you appear for the first time in the court, this is what I want to share with you. Now, my friends, transformation from a law graduate to a lawyer in relation to a criminal trial. This is the subject. So I'll be focusing more on a criminal trial because that's what I love. This is what I've been practicing for so many years. And the first and the basic thing which I would like to tell you, either you want to practice on the civil side or you want to practice on criminal side. The basic principle is that you need to have common sense. This is what I feel. And what is law, by the way? Law is nothing but a codified common sense. And if you have that common sense, understanding of the things which are happening around you, my friends, you will never have any problem in conducting any trial, in appearing before any court. You will have no fear at all. So the basic thing what you need to do is sharpen your skills for this common sense. And application of common sense is wisdom. This is what I have been trying to tell you. So how does this work? When it comes to a criminal trial, when a young lawyer gets his first brief of a criminal case and he goes and appears in the court, what happens then?
Sorry to bother you, sir. Your voice is not audible. Can you just be little closer to?
Is it audible now?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Sorry to disturb you, sir. Please continue.
Okay, not a problem. Please let me know if it's not audible. So, my dear friends, I hope you could hear me for last 10 minutes. The sum and substance of what I was trying to tell you is this, that from a law graduate to a lawyer, your transformation is from knowledge to wisdom. And by wisdom, I mean common sense. A person who has common sense will never have any problem or a difficulty to handle any sort of a case, whether a criminal case or a civil suit, any kind of a matter. The person who has common sense will never have any difficulty at all. And therefore, we are going to discuss this in relation to a criminal case. Now, what happens with a young lawyer when he gets his first brief and he goes and appears in the court and he has to defend a client, say a very small case of theft, maybe a small case of assault, or then you go to the sessions cases where the murder trials, offenses under the POCSO Act, the Prevention of Corruption Act, so many trials go on. So what does a junior have to do? What does a young lawyer have to do in order to see that he becomes a good lawyer? And out of my experience, I can tell you, my friends, that in order to become a good lawyer practicing on criminal side, you need to understand human psychology. By now, you must have learned so many laws, the Criminal Procedure Code, the Indian Penal Code, the Indian Evidence Act. Of course, they are important, no doubt. The court proceedings go on on the basis of these laws. But before you go to any of this, what you have to understand is the human psychology. Unless a person practicing on a criminal side understands a human psychology, I do not feel they will be good in their career as a lawyer practicing on a criminal side. I can see so many stalwarts on the screen. Avinash Bhide sir, Subhash Ghadge sir, Vasantrao Bhosle sir. These are all the stalwart lawyers practicing on criminal side also. But at the very same time, and they have a lot of experience. I have heard their lectures also. But then I am going to share my small experiences with you. So when we are going to start practicing as a lawyer practicing on a criminal side, the first important thing is a very keen observation of things, what are happening around you. For example, you receive a brief and you are going to defend a criminal case, accused in a particular criminal case. Then the basic thing which you need to do is, by now you must have heard this word, a charge sheet. By now you must have heard the word FIR. By now you must have heard the word investigation. So what happens in a criminal trial and what you have to do in a criminal trial is, according to me, this. An incident takes place. Let's say a ghastly murder takes place in an open place where one or more assailants come and attack a victim by means of deadly weapon and assault him and commit his murder. Now this is an open place. There are so many people, the proper word is witnesses. There are so many people watching it who are then called as witnesses. Now this incident is seen by so many people, witnessed by so many people. Now, let us assume that this incident has taken place. The first thing that happens is that about this incident, an information is given to a police station by some maybe a relative of the witness or any third person. The police receives this information and it is noted down, it is written down in the register, which is called as the FIR register. And this information about an incident of an offense being committed is called as the first information report. And from there, the investigation in a criminal matter starts. But I'm on a very different point. I'm not going to teach you law at all. माझा म्हणण्याचा मुद्दा वेगळा आहे की एखादी घटना घडली, एखादा भर दिवसात 4-4 समक्ष एखादा वाईट प्रसंग घडला, एखादा मर्डर झाला ज्याच्यामध्ये एका व्यक्तीवरती काही लोकांनी धारदार हत्यारांनी, मोठ्या हत्यारांनी अटॅक केला आणि त्याच्यामध्ये त्याचा मृत्यू झाला. ही गोष्ट बऱ्याच लोकांनी तिकडच्या पाहिली, ज्यांना आपण विटनेसेस म्हणतो. आणि ही माहिती त्यानंतर पोलीस स्टेशनला कोणीतरी दिली, ती पोलिसांनी लिहून घेतली, ज्याला आपण फर्स्ट इन्फॉर्मेशन रिपोर्ट, let's say FIR, we call it an FIR. Now I'm not going to teach you law on this point. What I'm trying to tell you is that one incident witnessed by so many people, right? Number one, in the next few hours, this information is reported on so many news channels, on WhatsApp media, and you get to know that such an incident has taken place. Now from here starts the human psychology. इथून एखाद्या माणसाचं human psychology चालू होते. And then you start imagining how the incident must have taken place. ही घटना कशी घडली असेल. आपण पेपरमध्ये आपण जशी बातमी वाचतो, एखाद्या व्हिडिओ चॅनलवरती आपण न्यूज ऐकतो, त्यानंतर आपल्या डोक्यामध्ये लगेच विचारायला लागतात की ही घटना कशी घडली असेल. अँड दिस इज युअर इमॅजिनेशन. हे तुमचं एक इमॅजिनेशन असतं. यू ट्राय अँड इमॅजिन हाऊ दॅट थिंग मस्ट हॅव टेकन प्लेस अँड देर इज ऑलवेज अ पिक्चर इन युअर हेड दॅट हाऊ दिस इन्सिडेंट मस्ट हॅव टेकन प्लेस. सो दिस इज द फर्स्ट इम्प्रेशन यू गेट अबाउट एनी इन्सिडेंट. कुठल्याही घटनेसंदर्भात आपल्या ऍज अ लॉयर आय एम टेलिंग यू or even as a layman I am telling you, whenever you come to know about any incident, immediately your mind, your brain creates an image in your head, in your mind, an image is created. Now, if you listen carefully, one more important aspect. Now, if this news is reported on the next day in a newspaper, giving all the details of the place, of the time, of the name of the assailants, of the name of the victim, maybe you know some, maybe you don't know anybody, then you get some more information about that incident. Again, the same brain, the same mind, which had earlier got one impression, now gets some feeding of new facts, and then a little bit different image is created in your own mind, in your own brain, in your own head. This is the second impression. Now let us assume, my friends, that you are a lawyer and you are going to defend this person, this accused person, who is accused of having committed this particular crime. So what is the first document you receive? The first document you always receive is the FIR, the first information report. So now let's see, number one, you receive the news from media and you have one picture. You read the newspaper and got some more detail. On the next day, you got a little bit more clear picture. The next day, the relatives of the client come and meet you and they give you a copy of FIR. You read the FIR in detail and then you get more details and a clearer picture is there in your mind. So my friends, the more information you get, every time you get more information, the picture in your mind about that particular incident keeps on changing.
You're now
So
connected.
Thereafter, the investigation is carried out.
Rocker 400.
Hello? Any disturbance? Sorry? You can hear me?
Sir, you can carry on. Sir, you can carry on.
Let us say the investigation is carried out after the FIR is registered. The police go and record the statements of the witnesses. The police prepare a pancharama of the spot of incident. The police sees the weapons. The police sees the clothes, the blood-stained clothes. The police sees the weapon on which there is a blood. And the police send all these articles to the chemical analyzer to find out whether the blood on those weapons and on the clothes belong to that particular victim by taking the sample of the blood of the victim. So in this way, the investigation is carried out by the investigating agency. And finally, a charge sheet is prepared and forwarded to the court having jurisdiction to take cognizance of that particular offense, which you must have read by now in the Code of Criminal Procedure. Once you receive the charge sheet, so kindly see, these are the steps I'm trying to tell you. The first information you get from maybe some WhatsApp or some media. The next you read in the next newspaper. The next you get an FIR, a copy of a FIR. And finally, after the completion of investigation, you get the copy of a charge sheet. So many steps have taken place. And in every step, you have got more information about that particular incident. And in every step, when you get more information, a picture is created in your own mind about how the incident must have taken place. Do you understand? And therefore, This picture keeps on changing as more and more and more facts come to your knowledge. My friends, this is exactly what you have to do. You have not seen the incident. You are a third person. You are just getting information from different sources, and you are just putting it in your head. You are just, trying to understand, trying to go into details, find out more details, and solve the issues, solve the questions in your head, correlate all the things, and create a picture in your head. My friends, this is exactly what you're going to do. These different pictures which were created in your mind throughout, from the day when you got the first information from a newspaper to the FIR to the charge. One picture, one more picture, a theory which suits your clients, and called the defense. And you have to create a picture of this defense of innocence in the mind of the judge to judge whether guilty or whether you are not guilty. So my friends, this is psychology, what I'm trying to tell you. That if one incident has taken place, and by getting different information, the version in your own head keeps on a different point of time, then this honorable judge who is sitting there, who is going to try and judge you, who is going to read the evidence, who is going to hear the witnesses and come to a conclusion whether you are guilty or not. Now, my friends, it is your duty, it is your responsibility to create an impression in the mind of that judge that whatever allegations are leveled against your client, whatever theory or whatever version has been brought by the prosecution or the complainant is not the true version, but this is the version which I am putting before you, and this is the true version. And therefore, you have to create one more version, which is nothing but the defense version. And this is precisely what you are going to do. By and large, what I mean, म्हणजे माझ्या काही मराठी मित्रांकडनं, फक्त मराठी समजणाऱ्या मित्रांकरता मी मुद्दाम सांगेन की ज्यावेळी अशी एक प्रकारची वेगवेगळी व्हर्जन्स आपल्याकडे येतात, पहिल्यांदा आपण नुसती व्हॉट्सअपवरती बातमी वाचतो, त्यानंतर टीव्ही वरती आपण थोडीशी इन्फॉर्मेशन बघतो, त्यानंतर मग आपण दुसऱ्या दिवशी वर्तमानपत्रामध्ये त्या घटनेची माहिती घेतो, त्यानंतर आपल्या हातात FIR येते, FIR मध्ये थोडी डिटेल मिळतात, त्यानंतर त्याच्यामध्ये पोलीस तपास करतात आणि तपासाअंती एक दोषारोप दाखल करतात, ज्यामध्ये सर्व पंचनामे, सर्व साक्षीदारांचे स्टेटमेंट, सगळ्या गोष्टी त्या चार्जशीट मध्ये असतात. आणि ह्या प्रत्येक जसजशी आपल्याला माहिती मिळत जाईल तसतशी आपण ती घटना बघितलेली नसते. प्रत्येक वेळी आपल्या मनामध्ये, आपल्या डोक्यामध्ये त्या संपूर्ण घटनेचं एक चित्र निर्माण होत असतं. आपण काहीच पाहिलेलं नसतं, परंतु एक चित्र आपल्या मनामध्ये, आपल्या डोक्यामध्ये निर्माण होत. आणि आपल्याला याची खात्री करायची, चित्र जे प्रॉसिक्युशन घेऊन येते की तुम्ही एखादा गुन्हा केलेला आहे, तशाच प्रकारचं एखादं चित्र तुम्हाला सन्मान असं चित्र निर्माण करू शकता. Now the question is, how do you do it? This is the real question. How do I do this? I mean, there are witnesses. They are to come in the witness box and say, yeah, this is the person who has committed this offense. I have seen him doing this particular act. मी या माणसाला ही घटना करताना, हे वाईट कृत्य करताना पाहिलेलं आहे माझ्या डोळ्यांनी. काही साक्षीदार आहेत, ते सांगणार आहेत की ह्या आरोपीने एक हत्या केलं, ह्या लपवून कोण कोर्टामध्ये सांग. तिथे पोलीस अधिकारी आहेत, ते येऊन साक्ष देणार आहेत. इकडे लपवून ठेवलेले आणि त्यानंतर दोनच्या समक्ष आम्हाला त्याने विटनेसेस येणार आहे आणि ते असं सांगणार आहे की आरोपीकडनं जप्त केलेलं जे हत्या, आरोपीच्या ताब्यातनं जप्त आम्हाला रक्त मिळालं आणि हे जे रक्त आहे त्याचा नमुना आम्ही घेतला. मयत जो व्यक्ती आहे ज्याच्यावरती हल्ला झाला त्याचा रक्ताचा नमुना आम्ही विश्लेषणाला पाठवला आणि विश्लेषणामध्ये असं दिसून आलं की ते आणि हे रक्त एकच आहे. याचा अर्थ असा आहे आरोपीने there are going to be so many legal analyzers, the reports of evidence coming before the court, and the court will have to scrutinize this witness, the evidence. So, how do you handle witnesses? And this is the real application. This past 5 years, these are the tools going to make it which तुम्ही वर्षामध्ये ही जे वेगवेगळ्या कायद्यांची प्रोव्हिजन्सचा अभ्यास तुम्ही वापर करून तुम्हाला तुमची केस सिद्ध करायची. Now how not referring to any provisions of law because you need to have. So what happens actually? What you see in the movies, whether actually it happens in the court, खरोखरच न्यायालयामध्ये जसं तुम्ही चित्रपटामध्ये then let's see. As we all know, there is an honorable judge, there is a defense side, there is a prosecution side, and there is a defense side. Prosecution side is led by a prosecutor, ज्यांना आपण सरकारी वकील म्हणतो. He leads the and the defense side is there is a prosecutor and there is a defense lawyer. मी आपल्याला सांगितली की खरोखरच एखादा आरोपीला न्यायालयासमोर आणलंय आणि खरं होतं काय and how does it go about? This is what we have to learn. Things it's very एखाद्या आरोपीच्या विरुद्ध त्यांनी केलेला जो काही गुन्हा आहे तो गुन्हा त्याला वाचून दाखवला जातो. त्याला सांगितलं जातो की बाबा रे तू अशा प्रकारे एका व्यक्तीचा धारदार हत्याराने त्याच्यावरती वार करून या ठिकाणी इतक्या वाजता खून केलाय असा तुझ्यावरती आरोप आहे. तुला मान्य आहे का? Whether you accept that you have committed this offense, this is called as framing of a charge or a plea. The moment the accused says, no, I plead not guilty, मी हा गुन्हा केला आहे हे मान्य करत नाही, from that moment onwards the trial starts. तेव्हापासून ऍक्च्युअली तुमचा कोर्टामधलं जी प्रोसिडिंग आहे, ट्रायल जी आहे ती चालू होते. Now how does this happen? What does the prosecutor do? What does the defense lawyer do? What are the tools that the prosecutor has? What are the tools that a defense lawyer has? How does he make use of those tools? This is a very important question, because you might have been taught what is a chief examination, what is a cross examination, what is lawful to ask in chief examination, what is lawful to ask in cross examination. You might have been taught all this. But when you actually start leading the evidence, when you actually start cross-examining the witnesses, that is the real time when so many questions are formed in your head. You might have so many questions in your head, and at that point of time, for lack of knowledge, you go blank for some time. And therefore, maybe this little experience which I share with you will help you. So what is the first thing a defense lawyer needs to do? From my experience, if you know what a charge sheet is, what is the first thing a defense lawyer needs to do? What is the first thing a defense lawyer needs to do? What is the first thing a defense lawyer needs to do? What is the first thing a defense lawyer needs to do? What is the first thing a defense lawyer needs to do? What is the first thing a defense lawyer needs to do? What is the first thing a defense lawyer needs to do? What is the first thing a defense lawyer needs to do? What is the first thing a defense lawyer needs to do? What is the first thing a defense lawyer needs to do? What is the first thing a defense lawyer needs to do? What is the first thing a defense lawyer needs to do? What is the first thing a defense lawyer needs to do? What is the first thing a defense lawyer needs to do? What is the first thing a defense lawyer needs to do? What is the first thing a defense lawyer needs to do? What is the first thing a defense lawyer needs to do? What is the first thing a defense lawyer needs to do? What is the first th आरोपी विरुद्ध दाखल केलेलं दोषारोपपत्र, ज्यामध्ये FIR असते, ज्यामध्ये साक्षीदारांची टिप्पणी, दॅट इज स्टेटमेंट्स ऑफ द विटनेस, FIR. Then it consists of panchanamas. Panchanama is a document wherein a situation or a particular place or a particular thing is described, is written down, that we went to a particular place. At that point of time, we saw that there was a vehicle, the glasses of which were broken. On the side of the vehicle, there was lying a dagger or a sword or anything. And there are 2-3 houses nearby, there is a road nearby. The actual description of a place, that is called as the spot of offense, Panchanama. फक्त वर्णन लिहिलेलं असतं. जे पोलीस अधिकारी ज्या घटनास्थळी जातात ते पाहतात, त्याचं वर्णन एका कागदावरती लिहून काढतात आणि 2 इंडिपेंडंट लोक, ज्यांना आपण पंच म्हणतो, who we call as panchas, in the presence of these 2 panchas, they just make a note of it, write it down, and this is called as a Panchanama. So what it consists of? It consists of an FIR, it consists of an Panchanama. Now there are so many different kinds of Panchanama. Like if an accused is in custody and he makes a statement, तो सांगतो की हो, आरोपी म्हणतो मी हा गुन्हा केलेला आहे, आणि त्या गुन्हा केला आहे म्हणण्यापेक्षा गुन्ह्यामध्ये वापरलेलं एखादं हत्यार आहे ते मी XYZ ठिकाणी लपवून ठेवलेलं आहे, ते मी हत्यार तुम्हाला काढून देतो, असं आरोपी स्टेटमेंट करतो. हे 2 साक्षीदारांच्या आणि पोलिसांच्या समोर करतो. त्यानंतर पोलीस त्या आरोपीला, 2 साक्षीदारांना, पंचांना घेऊन त्या घटनास्थळी जातात. आरोपी जागा दाखवतो आणि त्यानंतर त्या ठिकाणून ते हत्यार जप्त केलं जातं. याचा एक पंचनामा केला जातो. You might read the provisions of section 27 of the Indian Evidence Act and you will come to know what I'm saying. So my submission is this, that in this charge sheet you will find statements, panchanamas, FIR, and one more important thing you will find, that is the report of the experts. Now for example, if a weapon is seized on a spot, घटनास्थळी एक हत्यार जप्त केलंय, त्याच्यावर कदाचित काही रक्ताचे डाग असतील. कपडे जप्त केले अॅक्यूजचे, ज्याच्यामध्ये या हल्ल्यामध्ये विक्टिमच्या जखमीतनं उडालेलं रक्त त्याच्या अंगावर पडलंय. ते कपडे, ते हत्यार आणि विक्टिमचं ब्लड सॅम्पल, अशा गोष्टी घेऊन या केमिकल अनालायझर कडे पाठवल्या जातात. मग केमिकल अनालायझर हे सगळे रक्ताचे नमुने तपासतो आणि एक रिपोर्ट देतो, which is called as a chemical analysis report, a CA report. And that report he gives, either he says that yes, the blood on the sword or on the weapon on the clothes is matching to the blood of the victim. Maybe it's sent for DNA analysis also. कदाचित काही वेळा नुसता CA report कडे नाही तर DNA fingerprinting साठी पाठवलं जातो. So this is how you correlate things. So this whole compilation of all these documents is called as a charge sheet. Now my friends, if you are practicing on defense side, you will have to understand one thing, that you have to read the charge sheet from the first word till the last word. My friends, it's very easy to say, yeah, yes, I have read this charge sheet and I have understood everything. No. As I told you earlier, the more information you get, the perception changes. जस जसं तुम्ही जास्ती वाचत जाता, जसं तुम्ही एखाद्या गोष्टीची माहिती घेत जाता, तस तसं तुमचा एखाद्या गोष्टीकडे बघण्याचा दृष्टिकोन बदलत असतो. In a similar way, my friends, when you read a charge sheet for the first time, you will have an impression about that case. Now just close this charge sheet, close your eyes, and just imagine an incident what must have taken place. त्या charge sheet मध्ये there are statements, the statements of witnesses who give their own version. माझ्या डोळ्यासमोर असं झालं, दुसरा सांगतो माझ्यासमोर असं झालं, तिसरा सांगतो माझ्यासमोर असं झालं. Just read the version of each and every witness and then just close your eyes and you will have a picture of the incident which might have happened because you have not seen it in your head. Now from here starts your actual skill. Now my friends, understand this one important sentence. The one who is good in his seat is the best on his feet. Always remember this sentence. Now it has got a lot of meaning. It means when you are sitting in your chair as a lawyer and planning and strategizing and thinking and taking information from your client, the more good you are in getting and collecting this information and in preparing your case, the more better you are in actually conducting the case. So if you're good in on your seat, on your chair as a lawyer in your office, taking all this information, you will be the best on your feet when you argue a matter, when you cross-examine the witnesses in the court. So always remember this fact. You always see the courtroom drama and see that a lawyer is arguing in the court. You see a lawyer cross-examining in the court and you feel, yes, I want to be like that. But there are a lot of painstaking efforts, unrelenting painstaking efforts that goes behind that whatever happens in the court. The show which is there in the court, behind that show, there is a lot of efforts. So my dear friends, you have to understand one thing, that when you are in your office and when you are reading the brief, after the first reading of your brief is completed, you will make your notes. And what you are going to do is this. After you read the charge sheet, you will find that on one particular incident, एक घटना, 4 लोकांनी बघितलेली असते, one incident seen by 4 different people. And these 4 people are giving their 4 versions. So this is the difference. My friends, this is the key to the success. A human mentality, a human psychology, it comes into play here. One incident is seen by 5 different people. You go and ask those 5 people, every person will look at that particular incident from his own mindset, from his own understanding. And all these 5 people will have their different set of understandings. And therefore, when you read the versions of 5 different people who have seen one incident, you will always find some contradictions in the version of these 5 different people. And that is the key to how you start drilling into the prosecution case. My dear friends, when you have completed the first reading, just make a note of it. Just make a small note about your thoughts, about every single witness, about every single panchanama, about every single report, about every single document. Now, when you complete this, and this is what I have, this is just my way of doing it. I'm sharing my experiences with you. Now, when your first reading is completed, the next important step is after a few days or maybe 2 days, again have a second reading. My friends, this is important. Now, you may say, okay, fine, I have read it, I know what it is. No. If you read the same charge sheet after a few days, again, you will understand that you have missed out on so many things in your first reading. And therefore, the second reading will throw a light on so many things which you have missed out in the first reading. I mean, I will give you an example. When I was just a young lawyer like you, a friend of mine gave me a brief. I think it was it was a case under the Gambling Act or something like that. People were playing teen patti in an open place near a temple. एका देवळाच्या बाजूला काही लोक तीन पत्तीचा खेळ खेळत बसले होते आणि पोलिसांनी रेड केली आणि त्यांना पकडलं. This was, I'm just giving you an example. Charge sheet was filed, the case was conducted, the trial was, the evidence was over, and the matter came for argument. And a very good friend of mine, he felt that the judge is not with us. The queries which he had made during the course of recording of the evidence clearly showed his inclination that he's going to convict the accused person. And then he said, okay, you're also new, let's try and do something new. And he gave the brief to me. And I'm telling you, of course, I was young, I wanted some new matters, and therefore I had to show that I have something different in me. I can do something different. So I read the brief. First reading, I read it, and everything, the prosecution's case was perfectly fine. पोलिसांनी जशी केस करणं गरजेचं होतं तशी केस त्यांनी अगदी व्यवस्थित केली होती. पोलिसांनी रेड केल्यानंतर त्यांना आरोपी तिकडे मिळाले, तिथे पत्ते लावलेले मिळाले, तिथे पैसे मिळाले, सगळ्या गोष्टी मिळाल्या. तिकडे सगळा त्याचा पंचनामा केला. ते पंच जे एक्झामिन केले ते परफेक्टली त्यांनी सांगितलं, साक्ष दिली. फिर्यादीनी साक्ष चांगली दिली होती, पोलिसांनी साक्ष चांगली दिली होती. Then the question is how do we get the accused off the hook? एकदा वाचलं, दोनदा वाचलं, काहीच मिळेना, तिसऱ्यांदा वाचलं. And I still remember that day. It was at around 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. That was my 5th or 6th reading. I just kept on reading the same thing again and again and again. And then it struck me all of a sudden that everything was perfectly fine. घटनास्थळी पोलीस आले, आरोपी तिथे मिळाले, तिथे ते पत्ते खेळत होते, पत्ते मिळाले, पैसे मिळाले, अजून दुसरं काही नाही. देवळाच्या बाजूला एका आवारात बसले होते. वेळ होती रात्री 12:20. Now, my friends, kindly understand this. In the 6th or the 7th reading, I realized that in the course of investigation, the police have seized everything, and it was specifically written that one of the accused took benefit of darkness and fled away. As there was no source of light, we could not trace him. एक वाक्य त्या पंचनाम्यात गेलं होतं की काळोखाचा फायदा घेऊन एक आरोपी तिथून पळून गेला. तिथे लाईट नसल्यामुळे, लाईटचा सोर्स नसल्यामुळे तो तिथे दिसला नाही. Now my friends, this sentence just caught my mind, and I read the brief again, and then I realized that if it was 12:20 PM or AM rather, रात्री 12:20 वेळ आहे, लोक जुगार खेळत आहेत, पत्ते मिळाले आहेत, पैसे मिळाले, काही आरोपी मिळाले आणि काळोख आहे, तर काळोखामध्ये रात्री 12:20 माणूस पत्ते खेळू शकतो का? There has to be some source of light. And then I read the panchanamas and the statements of witnesses. There was no candle, there was no torch, there was nothing that there was a source of light. तिकडे कुठेतरी इलेक्ट्रिसिटीचा पोल होता, त्या पोलवरती लाईट होता आणि त्या लाईटच्या उजेडामध्ये ते पत्ते खेळते. Absolutely nothing. And my friends, at the 6th or the 7th reading, it just struck me that I was missing something. I was just missing something because the clients had very specifically stated that this was not a true case. This was not a true version. Actually, a real thing was something different, but they were falsely implicated. So basically, when something false you are preparing, you always leave some loopholes. And therefore, on the first reading, I found that it was a perfect case for conviction. Maybe the judge also found that it was a perfect case for conviction. So on, it went on. And on the 7th reading, I just realized that this is missing. And this important fact is missing in the police papers, in the evidence. And believe me, I argued before the court. And I argued this point only, that let's assume that yes, they were playing this game, everything is perfectly fine. Then what is the source of light in which they were playing? Basic need is that there has to be some light. रात्री 12:30 वाजताची घटना आहे, तिकडे काहीतरी लाईटचा सोर्स पाहिजे. And the judge was taken aback. All of a sudden, I brought out this point and he said, no, Mr. Desai, what are you saying? Just look in this courtroom. There is no electricity now. And I said, Your Honor, this is a day. It was night time. I mean, he was so confused. All of a sudden, this came out. So my friends, the point I'm trying to make is just keep on reading, and every reading, you will find a different version of the same aspect. Now, my friends, when I say you complete the second reading, again, you make your notes. This is the second reading you have completed. Then you must have collected by now bits and pieces of almost the incident. Now, the next step, what you have to do is talk to your clients. Now, this is a very important thing. My friends, as you grow, as you become senior lawyers, you will understand. But my friends, kindly understand this. There is no other person in the world than your client who can give you the best information about the incident. And unless and until you know the truth, you can never conduct a criminal trial. You can never conduct a criminal trial. For conducting a criminal trial, you have to know the truth, whether it's in your favor, whether it is against you. But you have to know the truth, my friend. सत्य जाणून घेतल्याशिवाय कुठलीही क्रिमिनल केस चालवणं हे नेहमी धोकादायकच असतं. And my friends, he is the best person to tell you what the truth is. And what you have to do is you have to actually ask him what happened. And he will tell you his version. तुमचे क्लायंट, तुमचा आरोपी क्लायंट तुम्हाला त्या घटनेसंदर्भात त्याचं एक वर्जन सांगेल. Just make notes of that version. Now you have completed 2 readings of your brief. You have taken information from your client. Now correlate the information taken from your client with the brief or the police papers, and then you will find that there are a lot of contradictions. There are a lot of things which are missing in the investigation. And you will also find that your client is giving you some false information or suppressing a few facts from you. Now, this is very important. I'm trying to tell you. You will not get this in the books of law. This is the practical approach. This is what I'm talking about. You talk to your clients, you get information. This is the first. Don't talk anything. Just get the information from your client. Make notes of that information. Correlate this information with the police paper and the charge sheet. And then you have a more clear picture. So this is the third reading you complete with the consultation of your client. The fourth important step, my friends, this is very important. The fourth important step is visiting the spot of incident. If at all there is, normally there is also. So therefore you have to go and visit the spot of incident. Now what is written in the police papers, what the information given by your client, and what you actually go and see and observe there, you will again find there are so many things, so there are so many missing links. What is written in the Panchanama may not be correct. The measurements and the distances given may not be correct. Or you can see that a particular witness say that I have seen this particular incident from this particular point. But if you go and stand on that point, you will see that it is not at all visible from that particular point. So there are hundreds of things which you will discover when you go and see the spot of incident. And therefore visiting the spot of incident is important. So every time you do this exercise, make your notes. As you grow, as you become senior lawyer, you will not require to make these notes. It will go in your head directly. But at this junior stage, my friends, you make notes of these visit of site, the spot of incident. Then what you do? The next step, you go to the court. During the course of investigation, the police normally sees so many articles, weapons, clothes, books, or whatever, some documents. There are so many things, CDs, pictures, photographs. So many things are seized by the police. So you have to go in the court, make an application to the honorable judge, and seek the inspection of all these articles. Now, my friends, on the face of it, everything appears. That's what's there to say into it. What's the big deal? I'll always see it when it comes in the court. No. You go to the court, you make an application, and you see all these articles, and you will find so many things on these articles. I'll just give you one example. How I found something. I'm giving you examples so you understand the importance of it. My friend, I was conducting a murder trial, the very infamous Nandos murder case where 10 accused were convicted for, 5 accused were convicted for murder of 10 people. And I was conducting that trial. And my friends, I saw an inspection of the articles which were seized. Some of it were swords, iron rods, guns, shotguns. And I was inspecting each and every document. And during this inspection, I found that the articles which were seized, like for example, a gun. When you seize an article, what the police do is they make a label. They paste a label on that article or stick a label to that article. And on that label, they write the date, time, place, number of the crime, sections, the names of the panchas, the name of the police officer, and their signature. It's called a label. It is pasted on almost all the articles which the police seized. Now, my friends, when I took the inspection of those articles, I found, I can show it on my screen, how they had done. This is one paper. So they had folded this paper. They had folded it, I think, in quadruplicate or something. This is how it was folded, and it was pasted. And on every side, there were signatures of panchas here, here, here. The whole paper, there were a set of almost 12 sets of signature of the panchas. What does it mean? What does it mean? It means that the police had taken a set of signature of the panchas and just pasted them on articles as and when they wanted to, and on whatever articles they wanted to. That means it was a fabricated panchanama. So when you see a particular thing, when you see it by your own eyes, then you actually perceive how this must have happened. For example, if a person is assaulted and having cut injuries on his hands or on his body, cut injuries are normally, they happen because of sharp cutting objects. You go and see the weapon, and if you find that it's a blunt object, then you can always say that this is not possible. But unless and until you see and observe and make your notes about those things, you cannot do it. And therefore, inspection of the articles which are seized by the police in the court is again one more important aspect. The next important aspect, you have to always go and see the original records in the court. You are always provided with a photocopy of a charge sheet. Now my friends, तुम्हाला जी दिली जाते ते एक दोषारोप पत्र आहे, म्हणजे त्याची एक झेरॉक्स कॉपी, फोटोकॉपी काढून तुम्हाला नेहमी दिली जाते. फोटोकॉपी मध्ये आणि कोर्टामध्ये असलेल्या डॉक्युमेंट्स मध्ये बऱ्याच वेळा तुम्हाला त्रुटी आढळून येतात. You will find so many defects in the original papers and the photocopies which were provided to you. You know, I am just again giving you one more example. In a very recent case, my accused had received a charge sheet. On every charge sheet, date on which the charge sheet is sent to the court and the outward number of that particular police station is always mentioned. And my friends, in a recent case which I conducted, I just found out that the copy which was given to me, the date was written as whatever ABC, and there was a number of the charge sheet and outward number of the police station. And when I saw the actual charge sheet in the court, the charge sheet number was the same, but the date had changed, and the date had changed by 1 week. Now, the photocopy and the original, there was a clear difference in what I found in the photocopy and in the Xerox copy. And then I realized that they had actually sent the charge sheet to the court on that particular day, ABCD, whatever date it was. And the court clerk accepted it and found out that there were certain inaccuracies in description of certain articles. And therefore he said, no, I'm not accepting it. He gave that charge sheet back. The police took it back to their police station, made the changes whatever were required by them, and then again after a week brought the charge sheet. So they made changes on the original, but they forgot to make the change in the photocopy which was supplied to the accused, my friends. And that showed how false investigation could have been carried out between the week in which the charge sheet was lying with the police. So there are small things. On the face of it, they appear like nothing, but they might bring out a big thing for you. And therefore, my friends, taking inspection of the original documents in the court is a must. So, first reading, second reading, visiting the spot, second reading, taking instructions from your client, third reading, going to the spot, actually seeing it, taking inspection of the articles, and taking inspection of the court documents. When you complete these 5 steps, then you will have to do the last reading of the charge sheet. For a period of time, you will do it within like a few hours or so. You will not take 5 or 6 readings at all. But in your original stage, in this stage, you need to do this. So this is the final reading of your charge sheet. When you will find that after having collected information from the court, going to the site, visiting the spot of offense, discussing with your clients, taking instructions from him, you will have a totally different version in your case of the case. You will have a totally new imagination of a totally different version from what you had earlier. And by now, you know the truth. And that is the real purpose of doing all this exercise. You have to know your truth. Now, by truth, I mean the actual incident, how it has taken place. I again repeat, whether it is in your favor or whether it's not in your favor, it's against you. But you have to know the truth. And when you say, like, you remember in the old days, we used to have these VCR, the video cassette recorders. We used to put in a cassette, play a movie. And then after some point of time, if somebody misses it, we used to rewind that cassette and play it again. Like the third umpire does in the cricket matches. The third umpire takes a review. He reviews the whole thing, sees it again. And in the second or the third review, he finds out more details. This is precisely you are going to do. By doing all these exercises, you are going to rewind the whole incident. Just imagine, close your eyes and rewind the whole incident in your mind. And then you are totally prepared with the facts of your case. And always believe and remember this sentence, unless and until you know the charge sheet by heart from the first word to the last word, unless and until you know the facts, I'm not saying your version, I'm saying the facts, the truth of the case, you can never go for cross-examination or preparing a defense. And therefore, my learned friend, therefore, my friends, this is the sixth step which you have to do. Now, after you have done all this exercise, you discuss with your client and you tell him on the face of it, you have given me this wrong story, this is not correct, this is what it is. So the client knows. The client knows you are the master of the facts in this particular case. And you have to master the facts of the case. And then he will tell you whatever was missing, whatever he has suppressed, whatever he had lied to you, he'll tell you everything. After getting to know all this, one important exercise needs to be done. So in a case, there are witnesses. The eyewitnesses, the witnesses pointing towards certain circumstances which led to the commission of an offense. Witnesses. The case is, everything is about witnesses. So the most important thing you have to do again, this is the seventh exercise you have to do. You have to have the information about each and every witness. Now, my friend, in Western countries, in UK, they appoint private investigators. Do you know why? Can you just excuse me for a second? I have some water. So my friend, in Western countries, they have these investigators, different investigators, defense investigators. You know what they do? They just go and dig out the truth. Because for the prosecution, there is always an investigating agency, investigating officers, so many constables, police officers, officials deputed to help the prosecutor. Then there are so many experts. Then there is a government machinery. Everything is provided to the government, to the prosecutor to help him, to aid him. But with the defense lawyer, what do you have? Absolutely nothing. Your skills, whatever you have, that is the only thing which you have. And therefore, my friend, this is very important, that you have to do a lot of investigation. You have to find out all the details of each and every witness who is going to come and depose in the court. And you have to do this exercise, because when I come to the next step, I'll explain why this is important. So this is the last thing which you do, the information you take either from the accused himself who knows these witnesses or from other source. You have to collect the information about all the witnesses. Now, after having done this seventh step, then always remember these 4 words, the 4 alphabets, SWOT, SWOT, not SWAT, the team which the US has for protection. No, I'm talking about SWOT. After having completed this exercise, what you will understand is, you know your strength, you know your weaknesses, you know what are the opportunities you have, and then you know the threats which you are likely to face during conducting the trial. So the strength, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats, these are the four things you will come to know after you complete this exercise. It will take hours together to find and collect this information. And when you have this information, when you know your strength, when you know your weaknesses, when you know what opportunities you have, when you know which witnesses are threats to you, when you know that which questions you should ask, which question you should not ask to a witness, which witness is dangerous to you, which witness is helpful to you, which witness you should cross-examine, and which witness you just leave off, don't even touch him. And then, after having coming to know all these facts, my friends, you prepare a defense, which I call a strategy. You need to have a defense for your client. So you will have to fix up a defense. And defense is just not one defense. There is always a plan A, plan B, plan C, and maybe a plan D. So there have to be alternative defenses ready in your mind. So if I take a particular case, I can give you an example. But now, right now, I'm just generalizing things. Maybe at some occasion, I'll take one case and I'll explain it to you how to, conceptualize defenses. And therefore, my friends, what is important is conception. Before executing anything, you have to have a conception of something. Unless you conceptualize something, you cannot execute anything. So therefore, I said, you have to be good in your seat, then you can be the best on your feet. That's the reason I said, when you conceptualize everything in your mind, your defense, everything, when you conceptualize that, when you have an alternate defense ready, you have everything ready, then my friend, you are ready for a trial. Unless you do all these things, you cannot be ready for a trial. And therefore, the last step is strategy, conceptualizing. Now you know these witnesses are talking against you. This witness is going to come and say that you have done this particular act, which may result in a conviction. So then what do you do about these witnesses? Now in movies, you see that a lawyer comes and cross-examinations and asks him so many questions, suddenly pulls out something from his pocket and shows, Mr. Witness, see this. Now tell me whether you are right or wrong. And then the witness says, no, Your Honor, I am wrong. I lied and this accused is innocent. Nothing like this happens in the court. No, I'm sorry. The strategy is to show there are different ways. Whether you can prove that this witness is a reliable witness, you have to show to the court that this is an unreliable witness, untrustworthy witness. Remember these words, unreliable and untrustworthy witness. What do you mean by it? That whatever version given by him cannot be relied upon. We cannot, आपण ह्या साक्षीदारांनी सांगितलेल्या माहितीवरती विश्वास ठेवू शकत नाही. हा विश्वासार्ह साक्षीदार नाही आहे. This is what you have to show to the court. And then how do you do all these things? How do you show that this witness is an untrustworthy witness or an unreliable witness? Now there are different ways in which you can do it. Let's say one of the ways, I'll give you 5 or 6 ways. There are so many, but I don't have that much of time. But I'll just shortly, cursorily tell you 5 or 6 different or 4 or 5 different ways. You exaggerate a witness. What do you mean by exaggeration? Now let us assume that it's a simple case of assault and a witness. You have seen the medical certificate and you have seen that there are 2 injuries on the hands of a witness, and that is what the medical certificate says. So when you see the witness in the witness box and you observe him during the course of chief examination, you will see that he is trying to exaggerate things. Then you will have to immediately note it in your head. And you start asking him questions that, Mr. Witness, for how much time did this incident of assault took place? He will definitely exaggerate. He'll say half an hour. Then you ask him, is it half an hour? Whether the accused were continuously beating you? He'll say, yes, 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 he was continuously beating me. And he'll say, okay, fine, then where did he assault you? And then he'll exaggerate. He'll say, he was assaulting me all over the body, my head, my back, my hands, my legs, everywhere he was assaulting me. Then you need to exaggerate. Oh my God. Then you must have had injuries all over your body. He will say, yes, yes, yes. I had injuries all over my body. Everywhere I had injuries. And then you ask him whether you had bleeding. He will start exaggerating things from the reality. The moment he exaggerates things, then you point it out to the court that, Your Honor, kindly see this certificate. It has got 2 injuries on his hand. They are very simple injuries. Now, if a person is assaulted for half an hour by so many people all over his bodies, he should have definitely sustained injuries all over his bodies, and he just has 2 injuries. That means he's exaggerating things, and therefore he is not a reliable witness. Do you understand? So this is one way in which you can show to the court that he is not a reliable witness. Now, let's see what is another way to do this. If you want to show that this witness is not a reliable witness, then you need to point out contradictions and omissions in the evidence of witness. Now, this contradictions and omissions in itself is one subject for which we can discuss for maybe an hour or two. But by and large, contradictions and omissions means there are 2 ways. First way in which you can contradict a witness is that he has stated something in his chief examination. When the prosecutor leads him, when he tells his story to the court, he says something. And in the police statement, he has given a different version. So there is one version which is given to the police in the police statement, and then there is another version which he has stated to the court in his chief examination. Then you have to cross-examine the witness by asking him that, Mr. Witness, you have stated this thing in the court, but in the police statement, this is what is written. Have you stated this thing to the police? Obviously, most of the times he will have to say yes. And if he doesn't say yes, then the officer who has recorded the statement will come and say that, yes, he has stated so. So there is a contradiction in what he has stated before the police, and there is a contradiction in what he has stated before the court. So if you are pointing out material contradictions in the evidence of witness, then that witness becomes an unreliable witness, unworthy of giving any credence. This is another way to show it. There is one more way to show that this witness or particular set of witnesses are unreliable. How do we do that? One witness comes and gives one version. On the same point, there is another witness. He comes and gives his version. Now, during the course of cross-examination by your skills, if you are able to create contradictions, conflicting versions about one particular incident of 3 or 4 or 2 different, 1 or more different witnesses, then you can always point out to the court that, Your Honor, see, this is the incident which has taken place. One witness A is stating this, witness B is stating this, witness C is stating this. There is a clear-cut contradiction in the version of these different witnesses, and therefore either this witness is unreliable, or witness A or witness B or witness C, either of them is telling a lie, or all of them are telling lies. So therefore, my friends, this is another way by which you can show that he is an unreliable witness. Now, my friends, there is one more way. Now, this is a bit, as of now, maybe because of a lack of experience, you will not understand exactly what it is. But you have to understand, my friends, one important thing, that a case is always put before the court through investigation. And therefore, there is always an investigating agency involved in this particular case. And therefore, what you have to do is that you will always have to fix time, place of a particular witness in relation to a particular incident. that witness A was at a place at this time on this date and he has done this particular act. Now this is very important. You have to prepare a chronology of incidents which you find out throughout the charge sheet. ही घटना घडली इतक्या वाजता, हा साक्षीदार इथे होता, ही घटना घडली इतक्या वाजता, हा साक्षीदार इथे होता या ठिकाणी. असं प्रत्येक साक्षीदाराचं स्टेटमेंटच्या त्याच्या व्हर्जन वरनं तुम्ही त्याची एक जागा फिक्स करा की या वाजून एवढ्या मिनिटांनी हा साक्षीदार या ठिकाणी होता आणि त्यांनी ही गोष्ट केलेली आहे. You prepare a chart of these witnesses and then you will find, this is very interesting, you will find that you will be able to show from the evidence itself that a particular witness was not present at a particular point of time at a particular place because he is seen from the police papers at a different place from what he is saying. And therefore, my friends, you have to prepare a chronology of incidents. And by this, there are so many other ways. By this, showing this, you can always argue to the court that these are unreliable witnesses. So this is the 8th step. Now, coming to the final few steps. By final few steps, I mean that there is a prosecutor who is trying to examine so many witnesses and show to the court that your client has committed this particular offense, and you are cross-examining the witnesses and trying to show that they are unreliable, untrustworthy witnesses, and therefore whatever was given by the prosecution is not true. So therefore, you need to see what are the tools which the prosecutor has and what are the tools you have. The prosecutor has always an advantage of so many witnesses coming in his favor, number one. Number two, he has an advantage and access to the actual investigation. They know the truth. They know how the investigation has been carried out. They have an access to the investigation. They have one full set of police machinery who is trying to help them. They have their experts who are going to come and help them. And finally, the last tool which the prosecutor has is the arguments. So examining the witnesses with the help of such a machinery and arguing are the tools which the prosecutor has. What does the defense have? What are the tools to the defense? Now you have to understand one thing. There is always one advantage which the defense has, which the prosecution does not. The prosecution always have to prove its case beyond the shadow of reasonable doubts, whereas the accused does not have to prove anything. He can just keep his mouth shut, keep quiet, and point out that whatever version propounded by the prosecution is not true. It is not believable. This is the only advantage you have. And what are the tools which you have? The tools of a defense lawyer are, number one, the right to cross-examination. Number two, arguing a particular case in a particular way and explaining it to the court how your client is innocent. And lastly, examining a defense witness, which rarely happens. In very, very rare case, a defense witness is examined. You will come to know as you start practicing why it is so. So these are the tools which a defense lawyer has and the tools which the prosecutor has. And therefore, the most important aspect which you have to understand is once you fix up a strategy, you know what you want from a particular witness. You will have to concentrate only on that and not what happens in the movies. You just don't try to prove that every sentence uttered by witness is false. No. You have to bring on record only those things which you want to come on record. That is the purpose of cross-examination. Once you get that, just forget it. And therefore you strategize. I want 1, 2, 3 things from witness A, 1, 2, 3 things from witness B, similarly from witness C, from witness D. When I get those things, I'm done with it. I'm not going to touch any of the witness. This is called as strategizing a particular case. And then when you're done with all this, the last part that comes is the arguments. My friends, before coming to the arguments, I must share with you one very important thing. Now, we always come up with this idea that as a lawyer, I need to have all the skills. But out of experience, I'm telling you that every human being has different set of skills. And before doing anything, before studying your client, before doing anything, first you have to study yourself. You have to introspect the words, the alphabets, SWOT, which you have to apply to a case. First, you have to apply it to you. First, you have to know what is your strength as a lawyer. First, you have to know your weaknesses as a lawyer, because it so happens that a person may be a good lawyer, but he's not good in cross-examining a witness. Sometimes it so happens that a lawyer is so good in cross-examining a witness, but is not good in arguing a particular matter. Sometimes it so happens that a lawyer is so nice in having drafting skills, or finding out case laws, or understanding the case laws, but he does not have the acumen of cross-examination or arguments. So therefore, friends, please understand this. So gone are the days when one person used to do so many things. No. Nowadays, young lawyers like you can come together. You have to share your skills with you. A young lawyer can say, yes, I am good at arguing. You can find another lawyer who is good at cross-examining. Third person is doing good research. Fourth person is finding out good case laws. You can form a team. It's always a teamwork that will always help you. Those days, when I started practicing, we did not have this thing where 4 people, 5 people came together and started practicing and doing things. But slowly, as I started practicing, I realized I myself have a few flaws in me. There are some weaknesses in me. I can't cross-examine a particular set of witnesses. But my friend can do it, then I'll always call him and say, okay, come on, you help me for this particular witness. There are some good cross-examiners of experts. Their only acumen is in cross-examining the expert witnesses. So my friends, before doing anything, please do this introspection. Please find out what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, where you can find your opportunities, where you may go wrong and that may pose a threat to you. So you have to study yourself. Once you study yourself, you know where you are good at. And after doing that, then do all these exercises. So when I was coming to this point of argument, my friends, this is another skill. Giving a speech is a skillful job. These political leaders which you see, who on and off come and address huge rallies, crowds. Do you think it's an easy job? Do you think that they just, speak whatever they want and the whole crowd of lakhs of people just sit and listen to them like they are fools, or they do not have any acumen, any skills? My friend, arguing a matter, putting across things which is in your head, in somebody, is itself a skillful job. And therefore, the last part of this my session would be the arguments. My friends, the arguments is one thing where you need to be the master of the evidence. From the first word of the deposition of the witness to the last word of the deposition of the witness, from the first document which has been proved in the court, from the first word of the document which has been proved in the court, to the last word of the last document which has been proved in the court, should be in your head here. You don't have to refer to the notes every time. Yes, you have to make your notes, but you don't have to refer to the notes every time, because sometimes that may distract you. So what you have to do, now you have to see one important thing, that there's one gentleman who has before you argued for an hour or two and tried to put it in the mind of the court that your client is guilty, and you have to take that out from the mind of the court and replace it by your version and show that this is a more probable version than what was argued by the prosecutor. So how do we do it? Now, my friends, first of all, you have to understand one thing. As a criminal lawyer, understanding a client, understanding the prosecution witnesses, understanding the opposite side lawyers, these are strategies. But the most important thing is understanding the judge before whom you are arguing. My friends, you have to see this, that you are going to convince one person who is going to give a verdict either in your favor or against you. And therefore, studying the mindset of that person who is going to finally give the verdict is the most important and the key thing for a lawyer practicing on criminal side. So you have to understand what is the mentality of the judge. Like the witnesses, I told you, to understand the mentality of witnesses, you have to understand the mentality of the judge. After all, he is a human being. So he has his own views about things. For example, I tell you what, in my earlier days, when I started practicing in the JMFC, there was this one judge. Whenever a theft case came, he used to be, I mean, you could see it from his face that he was inclined in some way in favor of prosecution. And then we found out that a relative, he and his relative were, traveling by a bus for a marriage, and they had collected some money which was required for that particular marriage. And the theft of that money and some ornaments which was with him was committed. And since that day, he had a perception and he had some sort of anger against the people committing theft. Otherwise, he was a unbiased person. But in a theft case, he behaved in a particular pattern. So therefore, we understood at some point of time when a theft case comes, you have to be very, very vigilant. So therefore, understanding the mentality of a judge is one of the most important things. Some people may like to argue in detail. Some people will be very short. But my friends, see to one thing, that you don't argue for such a long time that the judge gets bored and anything doesn't go in his head. And he doesn't even understand what you said. So you have to be precise to the point. Avoid repetition of the same things. Don't keep on repeating. Once you understand that the judge has understood the point, just leave it and go to the next point. And always throughout the arguments, your eyes should be directly looking. You should be facing and looking in the eyes of the judge. That is the thing which tells you what the judge is understanding. Whether the arguments you are putting across the judge is understanding or not. This is how you come to know. So throughout your arguments, you have to fully concentrate on the judge and see whether he's understanding your case. Now, what you have to show is that this is the case propounded by the prosecution. 1, 2, 3, 4, these are the loopholes. This is my defense. And this is more probable than the version given by the prosecution. That is all you have to do. And therefore, all these efforts which you have taken for last or maybe for many hours together will finally bear the fruits when you are able to convince the judge that yes, this is what might have taken place, and the judge accepts it. And therefore, my friend, if I had some more time, I would have gone in details about how to cross-examine a witness, about different kinds of witnesses. But by and large, when you are going to conduct a criminal trial, these are a few things which you need to do. On the last note, while ending, I would like to make just tell you a few important things. My friends, when I said at the start of my lecture that a lawyer practicing on the criminal side needs to have a common sense. There is one short thing which I would like to tell about common sense. Now, how do you develop this common sense? Now, everybody has a common sense, obviously, but the level of understanding differs from a person to person. And this is what I have been doing for the last so many years. When I started practicing criminal side, and the witnesses used to come in the witness box, and they used to depose. Looking at the face of witness, I used to have an impression of a particular witness. And then I used to prepare my mindset that how I'm going to cross-examine this witness or from his police statement. But slowly, I realized that it is not only his face, but his general behavior, how he steps in the witness box, how he holds his hand when he's in the box, where he's looking at, his overall standing in the society, how he's speaking when he's giving his chief examination, how he's answering my questions. The bottom line, observation, observation, and observation. My friends, if you feel that you have studied law and you have uh, got good percentage, first class or distinction, I don't think this helps you in the real-time practice in on criminal side or generally even on civil side. What helps you is observation, 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 practice, 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 learning, learning, learning. My friends, if you are able to do that continuously, then I don't think there is anything else, there is anything that can stop you. My friends, before I go, one important thing which I would like to suggest that if you have joined this profession as a source of earning, I don't think this profession will give you a lot. But if you have joined this profession as your passion, believe me, you need no entertainment at all. You don't need anything else to soothe your mind. This profession will keep you engaged. This itself will be your everything. And therefore, passion is the key to this profession, my friends. On the face of it, people don't accept this terminology. But believe me, I have seen people who have joined this only as a source of earning, and then the result was not very good. And I have seen those people who have joined this profession as a passion, and I have seen them prosper like anything. So, my friends, please see to it that you are joining this profession as your passion and not as a day job where you are going to go in the morning, come back in the home in the evening, earn for your family, and then going to do something which makes you feel good. No. If you are going to your office and going to the court and coming back, everything, going to the office, talking to your client, going to the court, coming back home, everything should make you happy. And unless and until you have that passion for it, I don't think you will succeed. And therefore, on this note, I wish you all the best for your future. I wish happiness to you and your family. And I thank all my senior friends, my bar council members, those who have given me an opportunity. I think I must be the youngest of all these people, and I have got an opportunity to talk, give a lecture on this subject. I thank all of you. Thank you very much. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sujata, madam.
Tons of thanks
Thank
to
you.
Advocate Sangram Desai, sir. Sir, your lecture was indeed very nice, informative, and beneficial for newly enrolled advocate. It's really a treat for all the participants to learn the provisions and stages of a criminal trial from you. Tons of thanks.
Thank you.
Sir, now we are taking the Q&A session. I will try to squeeze as much theory questions I want they have done. So one of the questions again and again asked is about the examination, examination in chief and cross-examination. Since the lawyers are just 4 months into practice, they are a little confused. So can you please elaborate so some basic difference?
Okay. See, basically, should I start?
Yes, sir. Sir.
Okay.
Stage is all yours.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. So basically, you have to understand one thing: that chief examination is something where a prosecutor, or in case of civil matters, the plaintiff, he is supposed to start. He leads his witness. When a witness comes in the witness box and tells his story, this is called as chief examination. The only thing which the prosecutor does is just read him, like ask him questions. For example, let us say an incident has taken place. Then the prosecutor asks him a question, Mr. Witness, where were you on this particular day? he will say, I was at this particular place. Then what happened? Then he'll say, I was just walking, and then all of a sudden this thing happened. This person came, and this happened. So on and so on, he'll keep on telling you his version. So therefore, a version of a witness, when he tells through a prosecutor, in case of criminal cases, when the prosecutor leads him, is called as chief examination. Now, what is cross-examination? Cross-examination is when the opponent, if it's a criminal case, obviously it's the defense lawyer who is going to ask him questions. Now, the purpose of cross-examination is very important. Now, the purpose of cross-examination is to elicit, like in chief examination, they want to just bring on record or elicit the truth. Here, you have the cross-examiner has a right to ask him any question to elicit the truth, to show that this person is not a reliable witness, or maybe he's an untrustworthy witness. So anything by which he can show that this person is not a reliable or untrustworthy witness, he can ask the question to discredit the testimony of that particular witness. This is called as cross-examination.
Thank you, sir. Next question, sir. Is there any particular criteria that some set of person can only be appointed as punch? Basically, who can be appointed as punch? That is a question.
Okay. So, see, basically, there is nothing like a particular category of person who can be appointed as punch. There is no category. So the simple thing is that he has to be independent person. For example, let's say there's a particular criminal case, and in that particular criminal case, accused and complainant, obviously they are involved. If that particular witness who is acting as a punch is related either to the accused or to the complaint, then he becomes an interested person, and therefore he cannot be a punch witness, because definitely the defense is going to attack that he was interested in the fruits of the case as he was related to the complainant. So therefore the police have to see that he has a standing in the society. Like, he should not be a criminal. If he's having so many criminal cases against him, he's having a criminal background, then obviously the defense is going to attack that he is a person of not a good virtue, and because he's having a criminal background. Therefore, while finding out the punch witnesses, the investigating officer has to see that one, he is an independent person, he is having some standing in the society. Nowadays, it is a practice. Nowadays, it's a practice, because police sometimes do not have time to just find out all these things. Sometimes the punch witnesses are not readily available. People, even if they are there, they avoid, because they don't want to come in the court and attend the dates and all. They don't want to waste the time in coming in court. So nowadays, the government has given instruction to the investigating authorities that, as far as possible, in serious cases, you requisition the government officials as punch witnesses. So what happens is, obviously, once you are a government officer, one thing is clear, that you don't have a criminal background, or everything is checked. Unless and until that is checked, you don't become a government official. So that is there, and therefore he is not also related to the case. In that aspect, nowadays, government officials are more often called as witnesses, the punches for the panchanamas in cases.
Thank you, sir. Next question, sir. It's related to a NDPS case. In a NDPS case, is it necessary for accused to sign the panchnama after he's being arrested and the substances are found on his person?
See, signed by whom?
Accused.
Okay. So now there are different scenarios. In an NDPS case, this cannot be a question which can be answered like that. So the provisions when accused is arrested in open place, when an accused is searched in presence of a government official, and when a search of a particular place is taken place and certain contraband is found there. These are three different scenarios. And in these scenarios, different provisions of the NDPS Act will come into play. And therefore, depending upon where the accused is arrested, in what circumstances the accused is arrested. All these things will be decided. Of course, there are different case laws because the circumstances are different. The case laws in these circumstances vary from situation to situation, and therefore I cannot make just a bold statement that yes, a signature has to be obtained on this particular Panchanama when something is seized from that. So it will have to be a case-to-case based thing. Section 43, Section 42 of the NDPS Act, it will depend upon that.
Thank you, sir. So next question is, it is relating to whether a criminal lawyer should have some basic knowledge of psychology, because he has to understand whether his client is saying true. Whether knowledge of psychology is one of the requisites of a criminal lawyer.
I think whoever has asked this question definitely is going to be a lawyer, because forget about criminal law. Lawyer basically needs to understand the psychology, because as I said, what is psychology? You have to understand, because psychology is a set of behavioral patterns which you learn by you acquire knowledge of. So basically, common sense and psychology are related to each other. You have to understand that. Common sense, which you learn by just normally observing things, and psychology is the same thing which you observe, but in a particular way, in a particular pattern, as if you are studying a particular subject. So this is a simple difference between psychology and common sense. So according to me, psychology is the most important thing. I'll just elaborate a little bit. For example, what I do is sometimes we have to travel for work. A lot of times you have to travel for work. I do come to Bombay by train. So when I sit in the train in the evening, my train starts at 7:30 and I come to Bombay in the morning. So when I sit in the train till I go to sleep, around my berth or seat, I'll always find different people talking, chatting to each other, discussing few things. Now, just observing them, try to understand who they are in their real life. Like if two people are talking, I'll just try to find out whether they are government officers, whether they are police officers, whether they are businessmen, whether they are politicians. What are they doing in their real life? You just do this, you keep on doing this exercise. Then you will understand the behavioral patterns of different people. And the more you do that, the more practical knowledge you get. And the more practical knowledge you get, that knowledge you can always use when you face a witness, when you face a judge. And therefore, psychology of a human being is the most important thing you have to do, you have to learn when you become a lawyer.
Sir, next question is regarding the post-mortem report.
Yeah.
So how to read a post-mortem report, and is it advisable to consult a doctor before cross-examining the post-mortem report?
Definitely it's advisable to consult a doctor. But before that, this itself can be a 1 hour or maybe more time requiring subject. But the point is this. See, people think that post-mortem is something very difficult and, difficult to cross-examine a doctor and all. So you have to understand one thing. What is the purpose of post-mortem? The purpose of post-mortem is to find out the cause of death. It's as simple as that. So therefore, if the cause of death is whatever the opinion is given in the post-mortem, if it is against you, then definitely you have to prove that the cause of death given in the post-mortem is wrong. And then you will have to find the reasons why the cause which is given in the post-mortem is wrong. And therefore, you will have to read column number 17 normally, which shows what are the injuries. That's a column of injuries. And then there is external injuries and internal injuries. Then you have to correlate the external injuries with the internal injuries and then come to the cause of death. So it is always advisable. And I also see one more thing. As you talked about psychology, even in medical jurisprudence, there is something called as analogy and logic. See, basically everything depends upon logic. So by a particular weapon of a sharp object, a particular injury can be caused. By other object, some other injury can be caused. This is a part of common sense. You understand that. But you need to have some technical knowledge also, and therefore you always consult a doctor, because mostly they use medical terminology, and you're not aware of this medical terminology, nor are the judges. So you ask in a very common way, which is not understood by them, and they reply in their technical way, which you do not understand. So it's always important that you always consult a doctor, and before doing that, you have your Modi or whatever book you have with you. You make your note, you have your questions ready, and then go and talk to a medical expert.
Thank you very much, sir. A last question. It is regarding, sir, there are different different between bail and anticipatory bail. So it is a little confusing. A basic difference.
Okay. See, basically, now as these young lawyers start practicing, they'll come to know section 436, 437, 438, and 439. These are the provisions of bail. 436 is bail in bailable cases. 437 is regarding bail in non-bailable. Now, when you come to section 438, you will come to know what anticipatory bail is. See, you anticipate the arrest in a particular crime. You are not arrested, but you anticipate that you will be arrested in a particular crime. And therefore, you make a simple, I'm trying to tell you in very simple language, not in a technical way. So when you anticipate that you will be arrested, your client will be arrested in a particular crime, you make an application to the Sessions Court or to the High Court under the provisions of section 438 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. By that, you request or make an application to the court, and the prayer in that particular application is this, that if arrested in this particular crime, I may be released on bail. So this is not a provision. Anticipatory bail does not mean that there is an order that you should not be arrested. No, that is not the provision. The provision says that you make an application to the court that in the event of arrest in a particular crime, you may be released on bail. So you are arrested and you are immediately released on bail. So people misunderstand that by anticipatory bail, we mean that there is an order of a court which says that this person should not be arrested. No, the order is that in the event of arrest of a particular person in a particular crime, he should be immediately released on a bail of so and so, so and so. This is one. And what is the regular bail? In a regular bail, you are arrested and you are produced before the court. We have to understand the difference. Here, if you are arrested, the police will have to immediately release you on bail because there is an order of the court. But in other cases, when you are arrested in a non-bailable offense, then the police do not have a choice, but they arrest and bring you before the magistrate, and then the magistrate may release you on bail. If the offense is serious, the magistrate does not, if it's offense having punishment for life or death, the magistrate will not release you on bail. Then you have to make an application under section 439 of the Code of Criminal Procedure to the Sessions Court, who can release you on bail. So that is the basic difference, that in case of anticipatory bail, that is, I should say a bail under section 438, the court first directs that in the event of arrest, your client should be released on bail, and then there is arrest. And otherwise, you are first arrested, brought before the court, and then the court releases you on bail. There is a difference.
Thank you, sir. And sir, I think I should take this question because it is a very elementary question for a lawyer starting. Difference between cognizable and non-cognizable case.
Hello.
Difference between cognizable and non-cognizable case. Hello, sir. Sir, can you hear me?
Sir has been muted. Sir, please.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Huh, sir. Sir, difference between a cognizable and non-cognizable case, sir.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you, sir. Hello. Secretary sir, I think Chairman sir, I think with your permission, can we end this today's meeting?